Good morning, friends. Welcome to the Immanuel 10 at 10. We're reading through the Bible using our 1 year chronological reading plan. This week we started with the book of Deuteronomy. The Israelites were on the edge of the Jordan River, poised to go into the promised land. Moses was not able to go with them, so he gave them a final pep talk where he encouraged them to be faithful to the covenant that God had made with them at Mount Sinai. Moses reminded them of how God had rescued them from Egypt, made them into his own people, and provided for them all the way through the wilderness. Despite all their grumbling and rebellion, God continued to be faithful to his promises. The word Deuteronomy means second law. Moses explained and clarified the law for the new generation of Israelites since their parents had all died during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Collections of law codes like this were common in other cultures at this time. They weren't used in courts, but served as wisdom literature, like the book of Proverbs, which applied the law to their everyday life. It showed them how to live out what God wanted in their lives. The law gave them a better way to live together as a community. They were to live in such a way that the other people around them would see God's wisdom and justice. Back in Exodus 19, God had called Israel to live as a kingdom of priests who would go between him and other people. He promised to bless them so that they would be a blessing to the whole world, just as he had promised Abraham. Throughout Deuteronomy, we see a vision of human value and dignity worked out in how the people were to live their daily lives. These laws are not written to us today, but they are still for us. The Bible Project gives us some helpful tips for reading these laws today. First of all, we have to remember that these laws are the terms of the covenant given to Israel at Mount Sinai. Secondly, we shouldn't compare them with our modern laws, but with the laws of Israel's neighbors at the time. God consistently called Israel to a higher level of justice and equality than any of the surrounding cultures. Thirdly, it's helpful to discern the core principles that underlie each of the laws. That helps us see how they can apply to us today. In Deuteronomy 6, right after Moses had reminded them of the Ten Commandments that God had given them, he said, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength." This is a famous Jewish prayer called the Shema, which comes from that first word, listen. Jews would pray this prayer twice a day. The key words in the prayer are listen and love. In Hebrew, the word listen not only means to hear, but also includes a response. So it really means to obey. Similarly, love in Hebrew is not just an emotion that you feel, but also a decision that you make. It means showing devotion to God in how you live. Moses went on to say, "You must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands I am giving you today. Repeat God's commands again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." In Jesus' day, the Pharisees took these last commands very literally. They wrote the Ten Commandments on tiny scrolls that they put in little boxes that they tied to their foreheads. To this day, when you go to the home of a Jewish family, you may find a small box attached to the doorway containing tiny scrolls of the Ten Commandments as a reminder of how they are to live. But Moses was using picture language here to describe how they should have God's commands in their minds and on their hearts. We see that in chapter 10, where Moses says, And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? He requires only that you fear the Lord your God and live in a way that pleases him, and love him and serve him with all your heart and soul. And you must always obey the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. Moses reminded them that they were to worship only the one true God, the one who chose them and rescued them and gave them a land of their own. Because he had rescued them from slavery, they were to show love to the foreigners among them, since they had once been foreigners in the land of Egypt. In chapter 11, Moses said, "Look, today I am giving you the choice between a blessing and a curse. You will be blessed if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today, but you will be cursed if you reject the commands of the Lord your God and turn away from him and worship gods you have not known before." That was a constant temptation for the Israelites. They were surrounded by all these other cultures that worshiped all these other fertility gods that they would pray to and expect rain and crops and other blessings. And so it was a natural temptation for them to go along with what their neighbors did to try and get rain from the sky to produce the crops that they needed. Chapters 12 through 26 are the collection of laws for the Israelites. They focus on Israel's worship, their leaders, as well as civil laws and social justice. They were to worship one God at one temple and provide for their leaders and care for the poor. Chapters 27 through 34 describe Moses' final speech and his death. He repeats his warning and ultimatum from chapter 11, saying, "Today I set before you life or death, blessing or curse, goodness or evil. So choose life by loving the Lord your God and listening to him." If they listened and obeyed, they would continue to receive God's blessing. But if they rebelled, they would experience devastation and exile. Moses had spent 40 years in the wilderness with these people, so he knew how rebellious they were. He anticipated that they would continue to rebel and eventually go into exile in a foreign land. But he also promised them that one day God would give them new hearts so that they could truly love God and live. The problem is deeper than just disobeying rules. The human condition, stretching all the way back to the beginning in the Garden of Eden, is that our hearts are hard and rebellious. We want to do things our way rather than God's way. So God promised through the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel that God would one day change the hearts of his people and send his Holy Spirit to live in them so that they could truly love and obey God and be a blessing to the world. Deuteronomy is the last of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, which was written for people who were living outside the promised land, in exile, waiting for the fulfillment of God's promises. Through Jesus Christ, God gives us new hearts. He lives inside us through the power of the Holy Spirit, who guides us into being a blessing to the people around us. As followers of Jesus today, we too are called to represent God's wisdom to the world. But this doesn't happen just by saying what we believe or having an ethical list of rules. The world sees God's goodness by our actions and decisions to follow his teachings. Our lifestyle tells the truth about what we really value. This week, may you be empowered by God's Spirit to respond to his goodness and show it to the people around you. Next week, we will begin walking through the book of Joshua, which tells how the people began to conquer and move into the promised land under their new leader. Hope to see you this Sunday for worship at 8:30 and 10:45, with Sunday school and adult education at 9:45. On Wednesday night, our Lenten service is at 6:30, and all of our worship services are also available online. Have a great weekend.